Greetings, Earthlings. This is Captain Voltaire from the band Glyph, and my favorite band is Judas Priest.
I know we were joking before we started recording, like, hey, I hope you pick a band that I know about. I have heard of this band called Judas Priest. Let's start with the start, because obviously, Rav, you and I were both born after Judas Priest already was, a band, which means that you've discovered this band, not as a new band coming out, like a local indie band, whatever. You discovered this band that already existed and had success in the world. How did that happen?
So I think the first discovery came at a friend's birthday party. Okay. I had, 10 years old. It is, trying to do math. The year 2000, I am 10 years old. And my friend Adam, who was the drummer for Striker, so we grew up in the same neighborhood. And so I went over for his birthday party, and his older brother bought him Judas Priest Painkiller as a gift. And of course, we all get excited and we rush and put the CD in the CD player, and our minds are just blown. We've never heard anything like this in our entire lives. The coolest album cover that I think we've ever seen. And that was kind of the beginning of it, for understanding, like, oh, this band's called Judas Priest. And like, if you're going to get into metal and rock and all these things, you should probably know about this band. So it was one of those moments as like a very young and malleable mind to kind of very quickly establish something in there to be like, I think this is what I want to do with my life. And so, that's why we're here.
Yeah. And a Painkiller as an album as well is an interesting one, right? Because it's kind of like it puts the cap on a second more than second decade, really, if you go down to the specifics. But although it came out in '90, if I'm not mistaken, it was like the ultimate '80s album of Judas Priest, of that era, the era with lots of color, lots of spandex, and sexual songs. A very different Priest than we saw in the 70s, and you have people now that are like super fan of one era and not so much the next era. After Painkiller, we obviously have the whole thing with Rob leaving the band and Tim coming in, and the 90s are a very different era then again. So for you, when you say like, oh, I really love Judas Priest, are you like, I'm a Judas Priest from start to finish, or are you like, I have my eras, and there's also eras where I don't go?
It's funny. I'm perfectly in the middle, where my obvious favorite era is everything surrounding, 1990, and obviously, but the whole catalog, because I don't know if you know this, but many of my fans and, Twitch viewers get to see this often, but I actually have the entire Painkiller album cover tattooed across my back and ass. So I'm very much right in the middle, perfect median, where everything that came before Painkiller I absolutely love, and everything that came after Painkiller, except the Tim Ripper albums, I very much love. And but nothing hits that pinnacle like Painkiller does for me. So I am an everything Judas Priest fan.
Your back and ass is really the highlight of everything Judas Priest. I have not seen you naked, and I'm okay with that. But hey, let's see how this goes, man. Let's see how this goes. So, given that Painkiller is so important for you, I've also asked you to think about 3 specific songs that really stand out for you. So, is it then fair to assume that one of, if not the title track of that album, is going to be one of the 3?
I was going to be cheeky and try to throw some curveballs and say, something completely different. But of course. Yeah, Painkiller is absolutely one of the 3 for me.
What's better, the drum intro or the guitar solo?
Oh, the drum intro. Because the guitar solo is not what it's not like, you know, when people say the name of a song, the first thing that comes to mind, that's always every artist's goal, is when someone just says the name of your song, there's a thing that immediately comes to mind. It's the guitar solo, obviously, or, you know, pain, you know, things like that. But the drum intro is like something I still to this day don't hear very often. I can actually think of very few songs that start with like an iconic drum intro, and that will forever be one of them for me. So yeah.
I would say like that album, but you know, definitely already before, where we saw some other albums, especially in the 80s, where we see this like retro sci-fi vibe coming out with Judas Priest. You know, like you see their album cover artworks, and they could have easily been, you know, airbrush paint in a carnival or on an arcade game and stuff like that. But this cool sci-fi, you know, undertone that you had with that band and everything neon at that time. Fair to say then, or I assume so, that in your, you know, current new band, Glyph, that is super exciting. Just a tiny bit of influence there.
Yeah, quite a bit actually. The reason that I'd picked these three songs, because it took me a bit to think about it. You know, people, when they ask you your influences as a singer, they think that you're going to choose singers that sound like you and that they inspired you to do things. And that is true for showing me that it was possible for someone like me as a baritone to sing in power metal. But when it came to Judas Priest, it's more about the imagery and the things that we were just talking about. It's more about that world building. And Judas Priest is not a band that does like lore. You know what I mean? They're not a band that really has like a lot of heavy storytelling and a story arcs that carry across albums and things like that. But they very much do have like a pseudo universe kind of lore that gets created. And a big part of that is the imagery. So something that, yes, is a big influence in Glyph is creating almost that level of wild imagery, something spray painted on a carnival ride, or like that you want on the side of your van. We've gone through a lot of painstaking process to make sure we're getting the right artists and the right ideas and going back and forth to really have it be something that is iconic. And it's difficult when a band is in its infancy. I mean, we have a demo out and we're about to go tour North America on like a major scale tour. So we're going from 0 to 100 very quickly. And so in that, you're rapidly trying to come up with something legendary, but you have a month to do it all. And so what most bands are trying to accomplish across, you know, their entire career and decades, we're almost trying to start everything at that point and then move forward. So it's establishing this symbol, this character, this style of artwork, these objects that are in this story. And it's ended up creating like a full universe around Glyph. So beyond just the music, now suddenly we're creating stories. And of course, you know, you and I are both fans and friends of Unleash the Archers. So of course I'm like, oh, well, if my friends can build their own universe, I can build my own universe, you know. If my friend built a go-kart, I could build a go-kart.
Exactly. And it'll come from space and has lasers. Exactly.
Hell yeah.
Is for you Judas Priest Rob Halford?
Yes. I'm a staunch believer of when a band loses its frontman for whatever reason, it kind of ceases to be that band in its entire essence.
Spoken like a true frontman.
Right? It's because here's the thing. There's the business side where the show must go on, and really I wouldn't want to see bands cease to exist because of a key member no longer being with that band. But I try to put it in this format to try to have the empathy. God's forbid if anything happened to Joachim from Sabaton.
Right.
I would hope that I'd get a phone call as a baritone power metal singer that can punch the shit out of his knee. I'm really good at punching my own knee.
Yes.
And so that they would say, you know, we want you to be the singer of Sabaton. But to me, as the person filling in, I understand that this is a business and the machine needs to continue going on. Mm-hmm. But however, even to me as the person filling in, it would no longer be Sabaton.
Right.
And so I understand you can't just rebrand and things come and go and all these different logistical reasons as to why. But for me, you know, and this goes with anything that there is a sort of iconic sound that cannot be replaced because no two, you know, vocal cords are the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing against Tim Ripper personally. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. But this is the same for other bands that I've loved that have had, you know, fill-in or replacement singers for different albums. I basically just omit those albums. And I'm not ashamed to say it because to me, there's a certain beauty in that image and idea. And I'm happy when those singers come back. Sometimes I get used to the new singer, or sometimes I discover a band and turns out they're on their fourth singer. But then at that point, it sort of doesn't matter to me where none of them kind of retain the image. Like, let's say like a Camelot, I got into them in the Tommy era and then, you know, learned about Roy Khan after, those kinds of things. And then for me, it's just like, well, Camelot is just Camelot. It is not defined by their vocalist kind of thing.
I mean, you may have picked 3 songs from Painkiller, but I think there might be a song that's older as well. What would be your second pick?
I wanted to, again, be cheeky and just pick 3, like pick track 1, 2, 3 from Painkiller and just call it a day. But again, for the sake of this interview, would like to spice things up a little bit. Right. The second song that I chose is The Sentinel. The Sentinel kind of was more around the 18 years old era where it really kind of stood out because now I'm old enough to go to bars. I can plug in $5 in a jukebox and we just play The Sentinel and Painkiller on repeat until everybody at the place hates us. And me and all my friends are sitting there singing every word, but then, you know, there's that bridge, you know, and it's creating basically like sonic cinematics where now I can see what they're talking about, you know?
Right.
You know, now facing one another, the stand off each eye, all at once silence falls. You know, and we're seeing this image in our heads, and this character, the Sentinel, it looks different to each person in their minds. Right. But in the end, it's a character, and you know they've established this character. So this is kind of what's been the central theme of the 3 that I chose, is that each song has its character. So as much as they didn't build an actual world and universe, but there are like these iconic heroes or anti-heroes or villains or whatever. And so the Sentinel was a really big one for that, because as I started getting into writing music, I started wanting to inject this idea of characters. People that when you heard the song, you wanted to draw your interpretation of what you thought they looked like.
That song, I thought, because I also like Machine Head a lot as a band. You know, that was just a band when I was growing up. I'm a few years older than you, so I was a perfect age when Machine Head came out. And Machine Head did, I think, a really cool cover of the Sentinel on their, I think, the Locust album not too long ago. How do you look at, you know, covers of iconic bands? Like, I've not seen you on a stage. I've seen you at shows in the crowd and stuff like that, but like Glyph, would Glyph cover Judas Priest, or are you like, you know what, all respect to the wonderful songs and we're going to do our own thing? Like, how do you feel about covering those, you know, most amazing songs in the world? Not on a Twitch channel, obviously, but
right, yeah, Twitch is the Wild West. That's where anything goes. No, in regards to covers, what I personally believe is no artist is off limits, but a cover song cannot simply be an imitation of the original. Nobody in metal is impressed by skill checks. I mean, we have bands like First Fragment that exist. Like, nobody's impressed by anything you will ever do because tech death bands exist. So So the reality is what will actually catch people's attention is if you are doing this in your style, your interpretation, your artistic version of whatever a song is. An example is like, let's say my other band, Ravenous, doing the Bard song, the acoustic one in the forest, but making it a heavy version. So something like that is just a reinterpretation of something, creating it in your own style. I would say absolutely nothing is off limits. And sure, I would say Judas Priest, if there was a way to do it, because funny enough, we get questions like this, or like, oh, we'll cover Unleash the Archers. I'm like, how can you do that without basically making it something completely different that isn't even your own style anyway? You could do a smooth jazz version or something. But the reality is some bands are so embedded in what they're like that it would take a completely different genre to make it into something unique. Whereas others, or even just taking like black metal songs and doing them with like clean singing and do a power metal version. I did that for Aphenimer. That's something where I believe that as long as you are changing the heart and the style of what it is, but maintaining the essence of the song, that to me is what makes a great cover. That's actually why I love, let's say, Cradle of Filth for the way they do covers. Right. When you hear a Cradle of Filth cover, unless you know it's a cover, it just sounds like a Cradle of Filth song.
Right.
So if I can do that with Judas Priest, where someone would hear and be like, man, that Glyph track's amazing. It's like, dude, that's a Judas Priest song. They'd be like, what? No way. Yeah. Yes.
Let's go to your third pick. Are we staying with some of their biggest classics? Are we going super deep? Another up-tempo song, or are we walking through some, valleys of death? Like, what's coming our way?
So personally, I'm a permanently up-tempo person. I struggle below 200 BPM. But the third song that I was going to choose, I wanted to have something that was a little bit different, because for me personally, it is a time-related thing. And so my third pick is Hellrider.
The return of the Painkiller, in a way.
Yeah, in a way. And so picture this. It is the year 2000. I have heard Judas Priest for the very first time. I'm 10 years old. Fast forward to 2005. I was 14 actually when the album came out. And there's a new Judas Priest album. And the significance of this wasn't really heavy on my mind, again, as a child of 14 years old. I'm still getting into a lot of things and understanding a lot of what this world and industry looks like. And I listened to those previous albums and was very excited, but very sad to kind of see that, like, again, in my mind, that between Painkiller and Angel Retribution, there was nothing. There was just this empty void from what I understood. So hearing this album come out, it's one thing that even at that point I understood that it's very difficult to have a sort of triumphant return after a long absence. There's one thing to be consistent and, recycle riffs or whatever different business models. It's another thing to almost be at that point of, okay, this band is basically finished or not quite what it used to be, and then fully revitalize. And that's what Hellrider represented, because again, hearing the album, there was some songs on there like a little radio rocky, and I'm like, okay, like I get it, they need to have those singles. But then with Hellrider, it's like, it's a long fucking song and there are so many riffs, but the whole, again, the solo and bridge section with the leads and the, da na na da 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 da. And then at this point, I'm starting to process that you can mix classical and metal. Because again, at this point, I'm 14 years old. I'm starting to get into things I haven't gotten into, early power metal quite yet at this point.
Right.
So now my mind is expanding. It's created another character in this universe. So again, I'm all about, wow, I wonder what the Hellrider looks like. God, I hope they release a Hellrider single art so I can get like the official, what does this character look like? And they're establishing story and lore and imagery. And then on top of it, now you're adding the element of kind of basically blending genres, which to me, the whole classical and metal now is basically like a duh. But at 14 years old, I was like, no, this is really cool. I want to sit and listen to a bunch of classical songs now and then try to play them on guitar, which most people don't know. I started as a guitarist. As I would try to sing, they'd be like, "Oh, like nobody likes your voice. Just stick to playing guitar where you're good." So these things were all very, very formative in different ways between Painkiller, the Sentinel, and Hellrider. But it's created this sort of bubble of what Judas Priest really means to me, and that's why I picked them. Because I'm the typical kid who go, "What's your favorite Judas Priest song?" I say, "Well, all of them are my favorites. You know, I love every song." But yeah, this has kind of been that bubble and world that Judas Priest has created. So now I get excited if they have a new character. You know, even if it's a terrible song, it still sits very well. And to Tim Owen's credit, Jugulator was another one where I was like, okay, there's imagery, there's a character, he's the Jugulator. I don't know if that's a member of Insane Clown Posse or something, but either way, I'm I'm very much just into this character, whoever he is.
I mean, I'm gonna assume that you've seen Priest live quite a few times then, also?
Only a few. I've only seen them live 2 or 3 times. Never at festivals either. They were always like their stadium tours that happened to come nearby, and I wasn't on tour or something.
Yeah. Okay.
And they
were
got
always a flavor of what
great.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. They were always great, but it always left me wanting more. It always felt like it wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. Like I've seen like Blind Guardian's my number 2 band. That's a immediate kind of, what are your favorite top 2? It's like Judas Priest, Blind Guardian.
Okay.
But I'd seen Blind Guardian, 13 or 14 times in one summer, just touring around doing festivals and seeing them perform. And after like the 3rd or 4th time, I was like, okay, maybe I can like skip a song to go grab a beer, or like, maybe the bathroom is more important right now. But with Judas Priest, it kind of always been this thing where it's never enough. Mm-hmm. They never play all the songs that I wanted to hear. And I feel like I can spend the rest of my life going to Judas Priest concerts and still never have enough.
So from a live perspective, even just seeing them a few times, like, what are some of the key things you took away as you're now building? You said it yourself, like, Glyph is going very fast. Also, obviously, nobody in Glyph is new to the game. You guys are all super experienced. But as you're not just writing songs and making video clips and all that kind of good stuff, but as you're thinking of this show and you're going on the road with Alestorm, what does that not what does that look like, but how has Judas Priest and seeing them live specifically influenced you, and I have a feeling the other guys as well, Darren for sure, into building what this first introduction to the world is going to look like?
Well, I can say for sure the one biggest influence is that it puts us under no delusion that we can do this for another 40 years, no problem. So at least there's that. Like, we don't need to make it big and then skyrocket. We've got 40 years. We've got plenty of time to take our time to build this thing up. But that actually is a big lesson that I learned from Priest, that it wasn't about, the rapid ascent. We're very much happy with the fact that as a new band coming out, we have a sort of built-in fan base that is extremely loyal and fierce. And so to me, a big part of putting some of this stuff together was realizing that we're starting off in a good place, but there's no rush. We are here to appreciate the art that we're creating and doing something that we genuinely love. And this may be, once people hear the album and stuff, they hear the production, it's very polished and very pro sounding and all these kinds of things. But we're essentially doing this in a vision that makes sense to us and is something that we would enjoy hearing, because our number one motto in any decision that we make in that band, and I can speak on behalf of my bandmates in this regard, is what would the 15-year-old power metal fan in you want to hear and want to see? How would they feel about this? Because to us, sitting around hearing new bands and new power metal bands and having posters of heroes or flags of album covers, the heartwarming image of a young metalhead that, you kind of think of and you think about some of yourselves when you were kids, that's the kind of thing that we try to hang on to. But then with the influence of Judas Priest, because that very much was that era of, we were very young and influential when we heard it, and it gave us a very happy and special feeling. Like in that moment when you were putting on those albums, you were the only person in the world that was hearing that, and they were singing to you. And so a lot of that emotion and rawness, the creativity of the songs too, where yes, you can have a 3-minute very straightforward bop, and then you can go ahead and do whatever thing and just throw in a classical section, because you know what, fuck it doesn't matter, it's your art. And I feel like Judas Priest never really truly compromised. They weren't at the point where, you know, they were doing disco hits. I mean, a lot of the songs are disco hits, but
for sure.
It's just that whole thing. And then with the live show, the entire element of just showmanship. Judas Priest is a band that is very good at giving you 100%, while they themselves are very clearly capping it at 75. So it's almost like you never see any of them breaking themselves, because they have to do it night after night after night after night. But you never leave feeling like you didn't get a full show. And so it's almost like a energy efficiency, I guess, is what I've learned. Because especially seeing Rob only in his older years, you know, I've seen videos of the younger years, but seeing him in his older years, it's like, okay, if I want to be this guy at 70 years old, how do I have to think about my neck movements now to make sure that I can make it all the way to 70? And it's changed things up a little bit in poise, in presentation.
Before we wrap it up, because you call this out, like, you know, we really had the 14, 15-year-old power metal fan in mind, which obviously then takes us back to when you were exploring Judas Priest and specifically the Angel of Retribution album. Because you said earlier, you know, I didn't really at the time really, you know, get the gravity of that album. For me, it was just the next album that I, you know, got into from them. If we now look back at that period, in the mid to late 2000s, we start seeing a resurgence of power metal, which was, and in Europe, you know, I grew up in Belgium, you know, in the 90s and the early 2000s, you had the Euro power metal that was always there. Blind Guardian, you know, Hammerfall, Gamma Ray, Edguy, but they were not necessarily headlining festivals at that time. But power metal is back now for over a decade. And that popularity seems to follow two things that happened. Number one, Rob Halford goes back to Judas Priest. Number two, Bruce Dickinson is back at Iron Maiden and released good albums. And all of a sudden, it's okay to have a guitar solo again after, you know, 10 years of new metal where there was no guitar solos. As you now are a little bit older than 14, are you like, did you learn to appreciate the gravitas of that album much more over time? Like, do you sometimes find yourself thinking back to that and you know, start theorizing about it, whether or not it's on a live Twitch stream?
Yes and no. Because the yes is when I get those existential moments at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, and I start realizing that, it's not about writing the perfect song, it's about perseverance, it's about consistency, it's about commitment, it's about being uncompromising to your art. Angel of Retribution kind of was a representation of that, because I really did feel like, as a kid, I felt like I got Painkiller Part 2 kind of thing.
Right.
So to me, you know, it very much stood out in that regard. But at the same time, when I say no, it's kind of because it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether that album came out in 1980 or in 2020. If that album came out today, I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's another cool Judas Priest album. Great. Because I realize what kind of age we're in now, you know, because even in, you know, the early 2000s, there was still that era of album mystique and artist mystique, and there was a sort of veil that was between you and the artist. And I feel like a lot of that has been pierced with social media, Twitch, and things like that. And I personally, I embrace it. I love it. I love having fans. I'll stream myself taking a shit for all I care. It's just something, you know, entertaining to communicate with fans and have
that
fun.
Might thwart the way we look at Painkiller from now on, slightly. But
Judas Priest has remained one of the few bands that's like elusive to me. I think the closest degree of separation was like made a friend who had dated Richie Faulkner, and I was like, oh, that's the closest I've gotten to Judas Priest. I've never met any of the members. And so they maintain this level of mystique that looking back on that album, I'm actually almost grateful for not having that with them. I mean, minus, seeing Rob's cat t-shirt pictures on Instagram and things like that. It's the sort of thing that has, again, reminded me of what that young fan in me really needed and wanted, which was mystery and awe, and how do I become like these people. It essentially created a drive in me to try to recreate a lot of those things, bearing in mind where we are in the age that we're in now. But I try my best to remember how certain albums made me feel, and that sort of guides a lot of my decisions, in everything down to t-shirt designs, to song composition, to just interacting with fans and what types of interactions I would have appreciated as a young fan growing up.
And we'll have that fan interaction and all that good stuff, both building the mystique and piercing it in the right way, as you guys are going on the road with Elven King and Alestorm for the Tour of the Dead Marauder, starting in March. And you're gonna be extremely busy as a first tour for a new band. So to wrap us up, Rav, without spilling too many secrets, what can we keep our eyes open for? What should we keep our fingers crossed for Glyph in 2024?
By the time this interview airs, I assume, you will have details on pre-order. You will have all designs. You should have an album cover announcement. You should have track listings. You should have basically all the album details you need to know. All the tour information is online on glyphmetal.com. And from there, we're basically just going to trickle out as many secrets as we can. I have my personal Patreon that I have no issue telling everybody in there exactly what's going on behind the curtain. And so we have an extremely busy year ahead of us. Mm-hmm. My wife has a very busy year with all the projects that she's going to be involved with. And as we call the power metal power couple, we are going to be all over North America basically the entire year. So wherever you live, wherever you're from, please reach out, say hello, Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, wherever. Love grabbing a drink with fans whenever we come into town. So.
There we go. Rav, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for opening the door and letting us in into the mind of Rav, or Arve Voltaire, and to see how the priest has influenced and shaped that over the years. Thank you so much for your time today, man.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
You are awesome for watching this video. Click right here to see more content like it and subscribe to the channel.